We're on. Hey, folks. So today we wanted to bring you some more advice around sustaining peak performance during a pandemic. Today we've got Dr. Brent Hogarth and the man himself, Stephen Kotler here. And Brent has some great material he's going to bring us through out of his background in psychology. So I'm going to throw it straight over to Brent. If you want to introduce yourself briefly, Brent, and then touch on the topic for today.
Absolutely. First of all, it's great to be here with both of you. My name is Dr. Brent Hogarth, a sport and clinical psychologist. I have a master's in sports psychology, doctorate in clinical psych, and I merged kind of my passions in my dissertation work, which was really focused on how mindfulness training, emotion regulation training can facilitate getting into more flow state. And that's actually where me and Stephen got a chance to kind of connect over. Part of my dissertation was learning how mindfulness could facilitate getting the best out of flow and mitigating flow's potential dark side. And so Stephen and I kind of connected over that. And so I'm happy to be here, happy to be working with the Flow Research Collective over the last 6 months. And I think the main question that has brought us all here together today is, with this current pandemic, we're all having and relating to our internal experiences in unique ways. And so I hope this can be an opportunity for us to kind of check in to see, what's working and what's not to maintain peak performance, and that making sure as we move through this challenging time, we're still moving in the direction that's important to us. And so that's what I hope we can kind of get out of this talk today as well.
Super, thanks, Brent. And then you've got 6 main points you want to hit throughout, and then we're going to wrap again with the practical end of it as well.
Absolutely. Stephen, is there anything you want to jump in right away? I just want to.
No, I like your format. I like how you're thinking about this problem. And it's different than the discussion we had last Thursday. It's different than the discussion we're going to have this Thursday. So I'm going to let you start, and then I'll hear in some stuff along the way.
Perfect. So when I've been thinking about our discussion today, I'm going to read 3 quick kind of quotes that have been kind of guiding my philosophy or thinking. And so the first is, we've all heard Darwin's quote, right? It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the ones that are most responsive to change. And so the theoretical and applied practices I'm going to be sharing today are exactly that. How do we adapt and adjust given the context that we're in to continue to move effectively forward? So that's first. The second quote I've really been thinking about, we've all heard, or maybe not, Csikszentmihalyi's quote, that the most memorable and happiest moments in our lives is when we are involved in overcoming challenges that require great skills and concentration. So while we're going through a very challenging, difficult time, I think it's helpful to be optimistic that knowing if we completely engage in the challenges we're faced, we can look back on this time period in our lives as a society and find great meaning and joy in it. And the last quote is really what I'm most excited to kind of dive into as we go through our conversation. This is Marcus Aurelius' quote, and this is his kind of emphasis on retreating within oneself. And the reason I'm excited about this quote is because acceptance commitment therapy, the approach that I'm going to be sharing my lens from, is really how to develop an ideal context within our psyche to move and retreat within, so that when we emerge out of, we're coming with appropriate action. And so Marcus Aurelius quote to sum shortly, he said, "Men seek retreats for themselves in the country, by the sea, in the hills, and you yourself are particularly prone to this yearning. But all this is quite unphilosophic. When it is open to you at any time you want to retreat into yourself. No retreat offers someone more quiet and relaxation than that into his own mind, especially if he or she can dip into thoughts there which put him at immediate and complete ease. And by ease, I simply mean a well-ordered life." And when we talk about flow, ultimately, we're talking about structure and consciousness, order and the chaos. And so I've kind of been thinking about those 3 quotes, and maybe I'll pass it over quickly before I jump into the applied approach there.
Yeah, let me jump in with a comment and then a question back at you. The comment, I loved where you started, which is with Darwin. And the reason I've said that, it's funny that you brought that quote up, because I've said this a couple of interviews in the past couple of weeks, which is, not only we are complex adaptive systems, we are built to thrive in change, and the proof is literally flow. We are hardwired for flow. And when does flow show up most frequently? In these kinds of situations where there's a need for innovation, exploration, you got to get into the fight. Like, all those things are why flow was designed by evolution, So we are, from an evolutionary perspective, really in a perfect spot for developing high flow habits right now. First thing. Second thing is a question, just for clarification for the listeners, because when you say context, you mean a very specific thing from a psychological perspective. So could you, before we jump into the next idea, please define context for everybody?
So a great question, Stephen. And what I'm referring to as far as context is our relationship that we have with our internal experiences. So the context in which we allow our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, memories to arise in, to move through, and to continue to move. And so the context that we're trying to build and develop in acceptance and commitment open is a very accepting, mindful, non-judgmental context, so that we don't get fused with our internal experiences, lost in trying to control and change our internal experience, and lose the ability to stay present with what's important to us here and now.
Well, I'll just quickly throw in, I think, a helpful example on that to make it really simple for folks, which Sam Harris likes to give around exercise. So he talks about the fact that if you felt the same sensation that you feel when sprinting or doing really heavy weights, and that pain within exercise while lying in bed, you would be flipping out. It would be brutal. You'd be wondering what the hell is wrong. You'd be massively stressed. Whereas when you feel that sensation or that internal experience with the sort of cognitive frame or context of exercise, it feels phenomenal. So I think that's just a helpful way of kind of differentiating out the perceptual lens or the context from the actual objective or internal experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll just add, so again, I'm trained as a clinical psychologist with my theoretical orientation, what's known as ACT, or acceptance and commitment therapy. So just for context, this approach is an empirically based psychological intervention that uses acceptance and, again, mindfulness approaches together with commitment and behavioral change strategies to increase what we call psychological flexibility. This is a key point that we're going to come over to throughout our talk. And that's psychological flexibility means contacting the present moment fully as conscious human beings, and based on what the situation affords, changing or persisting in behaviors towards our chosen values. And so what ACT really does is illuminates the ways that language can entangle us into kind of futile attempts to wage war against our inner lives. And so we use, as we'll do today, a lot of metaphors, paradoxes, and kind of experiential activities to learn how to make healthy contact with our internal experiences and not be prone to our tendency to avoid or fear them, which only, creates a vicious cycle by negatively reinforcing these kind of control strategies. So that's what I hope to kind of give as some theoretical basis of the perspective I'm coming from.
Why don't we start at the top of your list and start walking through those ideas?
First of all, absolutely. So first of all, it's important to recognize that ACT and acceptance-based approaches are a lot different than CBT and control strategies. So whereas in CBT really tries to focus on change.
Hold on. Cognitive behavioral therapy is CBT.
Yeah, I'm forgetting too that it's not just
okay, yeah. Keep going, doctor.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is considered really the gold standard in psychology these days. It believes that negative internal experiences related to anxiety, let's say, are often the problem and need to be getting rid of. In contrast, these acceptance and mindfulness-based approaches they consider these unwanted internal experiences to not be the main aim of treatment, but rather our psychological flexibility towards these experiences. So it's actually the struggle with them that's the challenge and the relationship we need to change, as opposed to changing these. It's about living a good life, not necessarily feeling well. I think Stephen might appreciate that. We talk about Nietzsche so much, right? And so it's how to get out of our heads and into our lives. So I'm going to give a quick example. Let me give a quick example.
Go ahead, yeah.
A quick example, Rian. So let's just take example. Everyone who's watching and you gentlemen now, if you don't mind, let's just look around our room and imagine that all the things in your room right now, all the things that are important to you are in your room. So whether it's family, career goals, relationships, whatever, just imagine they're in your room. And now if you just take it.
Can I ask you a question?
Shoot.
With my ego in here and all the other things, I don't think there's enough room for me.
We'll have to talk after.
Just taking up, that's a big office as well.
Come on, I got a healthy ego here.
So with that said, imagine when you look down at your hands, and in your hands are these challenging internal experiences, your thoughts, your emotions, your memories, and especially around this difficult time, everything that's coming up, having to adapt and change. So imagine you bring these experiences right in front of you. If you gentlemen can put your hands almost right in front of you. So these are your thoughts, your anxieties, whatever's arising, and we try to change and control them. What ends up happening is they almost come right over your face. So if you guys can almost bring your hands right over your face, and if I were to ask you, how able are you to be present and engage with what's important to you in your room right now, what might you say?
I'd say I've got fingers in front of my face.
Right, it's hard to even see them. So if we put our hands down on our lap, it's not about changing and getting rid of those anxieties, but allowing them to kind of rest and not get entangled in them. So ACT teaches 6 core processes to develop this psychological flexibility that I'll get into right now. But I know, Rian, you kind of had a question.
All I was going to say is Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar is a positive psychologist, I think, at Harvard. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. He just puts it very, very nicely and simply as well. He just says that oftentimes what's worse than negative emotion, like sadness or grief or stress, is the meta emotion that sits on top of it, of feeling irritated or guilty about feeling sad, or feeling bothered and angry about feeling stressed, or whatever it is. So, if you can remove that top layer, you at least have half the negative emotion, or one layer less.
Exactly. In ACT, we use the metaphor of the struggle switch. So every time an internal challenge arises, we tend to struggle with it. So now it's not just anxiety. When we struggle with it, it's anxiety about our anxiety and maybe sadness. Right. So when we have that acceptance piece, we can deal with the base emotion. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Right on. So let's jump in. Let's jump right into it. So ACT, to develop psychological flexibility, the first feature is developing contact with the present moment. I can kind of riff on this for a while, but maybe I'll open up right away to say that, we know conscious awareness of our experience in the moment enables us to perceive accurately of what's occurring and to adapt or persist in our behavior given that orientation. So as much as that we can be present in the moment is the first key. Anything you guys want to jump?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious is that it follows focus, right? It can only show up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now. So you're laying out strategies for working with kind of levels of fear, levels of chaos in the current situation. But I just want to hit on the point that this is also a high flow strategy. We're doing both. We're doing 2 things at once. And I also want to stress, I've said this a lot. I might have said this on Thursday. Peak performers look for multi-tool solutions. They're too busy to solve problems one at a time. And this includes psychological problems, emotional problems, intellectual problems, right? They need multi-tool solutions. So if you've got a psychological strategy that is meant to deal with trauma, fear, all that other stuff, and bonus, it also helps you get into flow. Those are tools you want to really reach for, right? Well, most of us, especially now in times of chaos, we're busy. We're really busy. People have their kids at home that got going on that they've not had to deal with before. And these are drains on our time. So especially in situations like that, you want multi-tool solutions. All right. Sorry.
Well, Stephen, I appreciate that. And also it reminds me of your quote from Mapping Cloud 9. You say, when high performers are stuck, they often need a spiritual solution. And when spiritual seekers are stuck, they often need a
It's a great one.
So I'm thinking about that a lot in the context of this as well.
I think that's very, very true. We can come back to it. Why don't you keep going?
Cool. So the second core feature is acceptance. We've kind of hit on it already, but we know that when we learn to actively contact our internal experiences directly, fully, and without needless defenses, we can move more effectively through them. So a nice analogy or metaphor we use in ACT is being in quicksand. So if we're stuck in quicksand, what do we know we're not supposed to do?
Flail like a child.
A run.
Right. Flail will sink farther, right? And it's the same thing. So what you're actually supposed to do, what I've been told in quicksand, is you want to lay your body out fully onto it. So increase your surface area so you can almost swim above it. And so it's a nice metaphor to know when we're faced with internal challenges, as opposed to trying to change or control them, the acceptance piece helps us get out of that quicksand. I think it was Carl Rogers himself who said that, as soon as I can accept the paradox of change is, as soon as I can accept where I am, I'm able to change. And so I think there's great wisdom in that.
Two quick questions. One, Carl Rogers, for those of you who aren't aware, is kind of one of the early post-Freud, pre-Maslow, that era, like 1920s, 30s. Do I have it right, Brent? I'm looking at you. I think that's about right. But he's in that era of like Freud, Maslow, right in that world, hugely influential. One of the kind of the founding figures, at least in clinical psych, in your domain. What the second is, and if you're going to get there later, tell me to shut up and let's jump forward.
Sure.
Acceptance is it's an action, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a passive thing. So do you have strategies for acceptance?
Absolutely, and we're going to get to those at the bottom.
I think so. Stephen will now shut up.
Well, I would just suggest that everything we're saying here is going to hit on part of the strategies as well, but I'll get to specific ones too.
Great, fantastic.
And Carl Rogers, for context, talked about really developing unconditional positive regard with individuals, and that was one of his great contributions, is really focusing on the relationship that we develop with people, which we really know in psychology is about 80% of the benefit of going to counseling, is that common factors of having that great relationship. So the second piece, or the third piece of this, what we call the ACT hexagon, is the development of the skill of diffusion. So we want to be able to look at our thoughts rather than from our thoughts. So noticing thoughts rather than being caught up in them. We hear these a lot, but the key piece here again is to recognize that we're not trying to feel better, nor are we trying to get rid of these unwanted thoughts. We're trying to learn to diffuse from them and the influence that they have on us. And I want to give an example of where I see this really going wrong in what I see, particularly regarding mindfulness. People really emphasize the use of mindfulness to stay calm, to feel good, to be relaxed. And it breaks my heart when I see this, because it's an inappropriate use of mindfulness, and it's actually using mindfulness as a control strategy. That's why people will say, oh, mindfulness is not working for me, or yeah, mindfulness is great, I feel awesome. And that's just trying to avoid it. Whereas mindfulness is really trying to get us in full contact with our internal experience, so we can diffuse from and not need to avoid from them.
Yeah, just on that one, a lot of people think they need a good environment, to do mindfulness or meditation in, but it's great to do mindfulness if there's builders outside with a jackhammer and you've got a pain in your foot and you're hungry and whatever else it is, because it, again, as you're saying, it's just about being aware of the experience rather than having it controlled.
Absolutely. Stephen, you want to jump on that at all?
No, keep going.
Cool. So this one is very interesting. So the fourth skill in ACT we train up is self as context. So being able, and again, this kind of, for me, has always kind of felt like bridging into the spiritual kind of world as a clinical psychologist has been hard, but ACT really...
We don't do that shit on this program.
Exactly. So self as context is being able to connect with a transcendent sense of self. So a consistent perspective from which to observe all the changing experiences in our life, what we call simply the observing self. So here's an example that I can kind of play out for everyone watching and you gentlemen here. So Stephen, how many times have you sat in a chair today?
11.
11 times, really?
No, man, I'm making it up. I don't know how many times I sat in the chair today.
So when you see yourself in the mirror, or when you introduce yourself to people, do you say, "Hi, I'm Stephen. I'm a chair sitter"?
Strange that you bring that up. So in my past life, I was actually a flagpole sitter.
Okay.
So I've got some background here. No, but can I do actually want to jump in for half a second, because I do want to wrap my head around something. Talk to me about, because it seems like there's a gradient difference in how you're describing kind of diffusion of thoughts, which is kind of watching, not attaching, right? The actual definition of mindfulness is minding the mind, right? You're trying to watch the tableau, unattached to it. So in a sense, in a technical sense, emotions don't become feelings, right? Once thinking gets attached, once there's a top-down, top of the brain down impact on emotion, it becomes feeling in the real world, and it's got a lot of energy. You're trying to observe before that. Talk to me about the difference between diffusion and if I did everything just correctly, and self as context, because it seems like self as context, is that just a step deeper in how you're watching your thoughts and like how you're treating your thoughts, or am I missing something there?
No, you're exactly right. What we look at here specifically is the sense of self. So we recognize the self as a process as opposed to an outcome or something static. So when we can recognize that we're something that's continuing to evolve and change, we no longer can get as fused and hooked into these identities or labels that we can take on for ourselves. So they're very much so connected. And it's, again, just recognize that the sense of self is a process that's changing, evolving, and can include multiple things. And it doesn't get limited to just that chair sitter, for instance.
It's kind of like, Stephen, I think on Impact Theory a good few years ago, I remember you said, don't take your emotions too seriously, or don't take your feelings too seriously, which is another way of
but here's my
it.
question. Right. So I did say that, and I always say that. I can't tell if that statement, don't take your emotions too seriously or don't take it personally, sits in the diffusion space or the self as context space. That's what I'm trying to drill into. And by the way, this is a framing device in the list and a way to talk about the theory. And I get in practice, probably not a lot of difference, but if you've listed it as a separate step, I'm trying to understand a little deeper why. It could just be me being dense.
No, this is good. So here's another example. So if I were to say, notice your feet on the floor and be aware of your noticing. Notice what you can smell in your room right now. Be aware of your noticing. Notice the sounds in your room.
Did you this down? Are you looking at a piece of paper that says notice the sounds in your room? Because if you need that kind of thing when we're doing coaching calls with clients, we're gonna have to revisit this. I'm just saying.
No, I don't. But I'm trying to. I typically do not, but I am right now because I have a series of activities I want to make sure I get to.
It's hard to be interviewed by me.
The point of it, Stephen. No, I'm gonna cut you off. The point of it is ask yourself. So there's a you in there that's aware of you noticing.
Yes.
Now, is that sense of self that's noticing, is it good or bad, or is it just being? That's the point of self as context, and not as the content.
Got it.
Right. And then the diffusion, Brent, I'm curious, the diffusion then is?
Diffusion is particularly related to our internal experiences, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and this one's more so just specifically to our sense of identity and self.
Now, let me ask you a question, because the order is starting to make a lot of sense to me. But I want to see if this is right. So I sit down to go through my mindfulness practice, right, and I'm just doing breath work. If I'm hyper anxious, the anxiety, right, is I sort of have to diffuse that long before I can actually get clear enough to find myself in there, because the emotion is often between, right, like blocking the actual core observer, right? It subsumes the observer in a sense.
Like clearing the cobwebs.
As you're nodding, Brent. Is that I have this right?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Keep going. Step 6, or go back.
Okay, 5. That's all right. I got the paper in front of me. It helps.
You do.
So this is really the main.
Can I cheat off you in class during the?
It would have never served you well in class.
No peeking.
Fair enough.
This is the aspect of value identification. We hear a lot about the importance of values. So we recognize that. I wish I had a diagram to show.
Here, Brent, I actually have the diagram here. I looked it up. Do you want me to share my screen?
Okay.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful. It's the diagram of the 6 points that you were talking through. Give me 1 sec. Anyway, you can keep going there.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what I'm speaking about is with values work and values orientation. This is, a lot of what, in Stephen's habit of ferocity, this is what we're doing here. It's getting clear on what are the big questions that we're curious about, and learning how to orient ourselves towards those, as opposed to trying to change and control our internal experiences. So values identification, there's a lot of activities I can kind of run us through. For the sake of time, I won't. One of the simplest is thinking about your eulogy and what you might want to be said to you, what you might want to be written on your tombstone, like some things that really create a sense of urgency to reflect on like what is most important to you. And so values is a key piece. If people want to do deeper work on that, I just encourage you to Google value living questionnaire, and you can check that out, or many others in this regard.
That's a good one. You brought up the habit of ferocity, and I just want to drive that point home for a second, which is passion, curiosity, purpose, and autonomy, right? These are all flow triggers. And in fact, autonomy, Csikszentmihalyi years ago pointed out that he uses the word freedom instead of autonomy, which was an older psychology term. Means the same thing. Autonomy and attention are coupled systems. Mm-hmm. So for flow, we want to maximize attention. If you're not steering towards things that you believe in, if you're not using your values as a way to drive the car, you are not going to be able to reliably get into flow. It will end up blocking it, because autonomy and attention are coupled systems. Mm-hmm. And autonomy doesn't just mean I'm steering the bus. It means I'm steering the bus in the direction I think the bus should go, in the direction I believe in, where my values are.
Beautiful. Green, did you want to add on that too, or?
No, it's all good, Brent. I'm just a little conscious of the time though, so let's hit that last point, and then I want to make sure that we get through it's 10. You said 10 actionable elements of it. So let's make sure
absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. I want to make sure people get it all.
The last piece of ACT is just committed action. A lot of the training that we do for instance, in the Zero to Dangerous course is learning how to develop attention and habits that are oriented towards our values. So there's not really it's not brain science to how to develop these, but it takes discipline and dedication and implementing the strategies. So I would say check out Zero to Dangerous for more on how to really implement the committed action. I'll give a plug there. But ultimately, I would just say that it's important in taking committed action. What screws us up often is we get overly focused on trying to regulate our emotions as opposed to our behaviors. So again, all these strategies we're learning right now is how to not get stuck in our internal experience, but rather reorient ourselves towards what the behavioral actionable steps are. And so getting clear on what those are is so key.
It's a great framework.
So
yeah, I like this visual, by the way, just to point out the acceptance of mindfulness then leading into behavioral change. It's helpful.
Absolutely. So I'm going to skip the piece I was going to talk about, kind of creating case conceptualization for what everyone's kind of experiencing right now. And I'll go right into what I kind of consider some possible avenues or treatment kind of goals and aims that can be helpful, particularly during dealing with anxiety and other challenges that are around right now. So we've kind of gone through all of them, and I'll let you guys kind of build off them as you'd like. So first, get clear on your values. We've talked about living questionnaire. Really, this is the process of being versus doing. So at a time of crisis where we're needing to adapt and change, being clear and regulating our emotions around our values, we might not be able to make the same progress or speed in our goals, but we know that we can stay connected to our values. And so for regulating our emotions, really evaluating our worth, our value based on just making constant movement towards what's important to us, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Anything you want to jump on that, guys? Or
let's go through a bunch of them and let's talk about them as a cluster.
One positive thing that we've been hearing a little bit from clients actually throughout it all, in terms of the benefits of this whole situation with COVID-19, is clarity around values. It's like some of the I don't know, muddledness or chaos just burns away, and instantly this is what I actually give a shit about.
I've definitely seen that all over the internet. People suddenly going, wow, I don't really care what bathroom somebody uses all of a sudden, right? That's not so important. Fantastic insight. We have to have a global pandemic for you to develop common sense, but good looking out.
So another key would be to identify that the need for control is the problem. When we practice openness, connection, really living that full catastrophe living, as John Kabat-Zinn would express, is so helpful. So practice self-compassion when you face your internal challenges. We realize when we don't judge ourselves, get entangled in them, we just naturally feel better, and as a result, we're able to perform better.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, it's funny because this is, in flow, we talk about the paradigm of control. In the state of flow, we get a sense of control over the uncontrollable. And that's kind of a well-known psychological quantity when it comes to flow. What's really interesting that's just right next to this, that's a parallel concept, is less well discussed. In complexity science, they talk about supercriticality, which is a system is most ready to change when it's most right on the edge of chaos. They talk about the edge of chaos. That's when it is easiest for change. And if you are fighting for control over the chaos, right, what are you sacrificing, right? It needs to move forward into, right? And what you end up getting, this is the funny part, is you ride into the chaos and you end up with flow, right? You end up with the control that you were seeking, but the only way to get it is to give up that need for control on the front end, right? Like every talk to athletes. Brent and I have skied together, and we both tend to like going very, very fast. And both of us will tell you that, like, the good news about, like, when you ski at maximum speed, a little tiny, edge of the ski will make your turn for you, right? A little bit of energy gets you where you have to go. So, but you're right on the edge of chaos. Are you going too fast? Yeah, you're probably going too fast. It's not crazy too fast, it's sane too fast, right? And to do that, you actually have to give up your need for control. Which is, it's a funny thing in action sports, but I think it's a commonality among action sport athletes, is they can all do that, right? You have to sort of sacrifice yourself to the altar of gravity, which, right, and it's the master control switch you're not going to get to drive in, most gravity-based action sports. Which most
building on that, we need to surrender to the fact that we can't control our emotions at times, in that sense, but we can still move forward. We can still get down the hill when those emotions, such as fear, comes up, and that's the same with everyday life. So the next one I'm going to jump into is, for those who are really struggling, it might be helpful to really designate a worry time in your day. Give yourself 15 minutes in the day where that's when you can really acknowledge the concerns that you're having. And so as you move throughout your day, if you have continued ones that come up, write them down, get them off your brain, and then just use that time as your kind of worry and freak out time if you need to. And I would say, as you notice thoughts throughout your day that are distressing, again, to build that diffusion, you can kind of reframe them and say, I'm noticing I'm having the thought of anxiety, as opposed to I'm anxious, right? There's a big distance or cognitive space between that, as well as you can almost name that thought pattern. So you might say, oh, that's anxious Andy kind of showing up again. You give it a name so you can really objectify it and distance yourself from it as the observer of it.
Brent, I want you to know you're objectifying my emotions, and I'm not okay with that.
We know you got that big ego in your room, so
all right.
And everything else.
That's a great point. That's a really good, and that's a really interesting hack to designate a worry time. I really like that. That's the first time I've heard somebody say that, and that's really neat. I really like that. Let's keep going.
None of it's necessarily all my original work, so I can't take credit.
I'm gonna take credit. In fact, he created that. Not only is all this original, he did it when he was working for us, the Flow Research Collective people. ZeroToDangerous.com.
Copyrighted.
Next would, again, it's building on those core features. So developing a willingness and acceptance and the applicability of action in that step, one way we can do that is through imagery. So I'd really encourage those people who are struggling to imagine going through the challenging areas of your day and rehearse how you would stay consistent with your values as you take action in those situations. I would really encourage that as much as possible.
Is that as a form of visualization or?
Yeah, so imagery. So we call it imagery as opposed to visualization because we want to bring all our senses. So try to make it as real as possible, what you hear, what you feel, what you smell, and just imagine seeing yourself move through that challenging situation, taking value-driven behavior.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
One quick side flow-based point. There's a treasure trove of research that shows that imagery work is very, very, very useful for promoting flow. So any of the skills you're going to develop here, right, doing imagery work to kind of manage fear and anxiety in the face of COVID-19, going to immediately, right, reality is going to start up again at some point, and it's going to immediately translate into really good flow work. Keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot I can go through, and a lot of it's built into Zero to Dangerous, such as mastering the flow cycle and our flow triggers. So I'm not really going to speak too much on those right now. But what I would say is continue, you know, if you are self-isolated and disconnected from the work that you typically are doing, I would really encourage individuals to find out where they can continue to develop competence in. So whether it's mastering a new skill, learning a language, learning a vocabulary. I like this app called Canva where you can create kind of great presentations. So you want to continue we're goal-driven individuals. That's when we get into flow. So I really want to encourage, keep seeking mastery in different crafts if you're not able to be in your typical one.
I think a lot of people are going to look back on this period very fondly in the future as a really nice, distinct period where they got to go deep into things they don't normally do. And a lot of people are using it to level up, to read when they normally can't, to do other things. And then some obviously are just pouring the time down the drain. So I think definitely when you kind of retrospect it, you want to be on the good side of that spectrum.
Absolutely. So I got two more I'll quickly go through. The next one is read faster. The future is faster than you think. For me, I'm being completely honest. I was at the edge of my seat, excited. This was even before this pandemic was going on, just recognizing and feeling a sense of optimism of the future and the innovation that's occurring. For me, being in the situation of self-quarantine, I just returned back yesterday from Mexico and thinking about the world that's changing. And that gave me a sense of optimism. And so fuel that optimism and that creativity and get that new knowledge in. And I'd really, strongly encourage that book. And then the last one I'll say is, as far as creating new habits around individuals' lifestyles, utilize this one simple principle it's called the PREMAC principle. So when we're trying to develop new habits, it's the most effective way is to build your new habits, whether it's your lifestyle at home or whatever it may be, around habits you already do. So for instance, if you want to start incorporating a morning mindfulness practice, say you can only brush your teeth, which you do every day, hopefully, after you've done your meditation.
Wait. You're supposed to brush your teeth every day?
Steven.
I thought it was 3 times a week.
Nobody tells me anything, man. So sorry.
No worries. And then provide yourself with a positive reinforcement when you do take action in those areas. It's important to always remember when we criticize ourselves, beat ourselves up, we might stop us from doing certain habits, but we won't build new habits. So when you're implementing these new habits, think about the PREMAC principle and really building around keystone habits, and then providing yourself that positive reinforcement to really instill those for the long run.
I want to add two things to that. The last two comments, because I thought they were really right on. And it leads back to Connor Murphy, our chief scientist, when we were on Thursday, pointed out that from a neurobiological perspective, crisis is one of the best times for information. And it's because there's more neurochemistry, there's more norepinephrine in your system. And norepinephrine is one of the main chemicals that tags memories. So it's really or tags experiences is important to save for later and turns them into memories. So it's a really easy time because we've got more of that in our system. But so the competence element, flow shows up when we are great at things, right? When we have mastered them and can do them at an unconscious level, right? I know I have to think to write. I can, my unconscious can take over kind of thing, or think to ski, that sort of thing. So developing competencies, if you're interested in a high flow lifestyle, I always tell people, figure out what it is you do for a living, draw a 360-degree circle around it, and figure out every skill that's inside that circle. And I'll give you a simple example. My life as a writer, I think one of the reasons I got as successful as I got is because I realized very early on in my career that, holy crap, my job isn't just to write, it's also to stand on stage and explain my ideas to people. It's also to talk on the radio. It's also to talk on television. And for those of you who have never talked on the radio or talked on television, that's not, like, those are skills, actually. I got my ass kicked on television for almost a decade until I got good enough to do it. They're skills, they're competencies, and you really have to work with them first. And the second thing with Brent, you're totally right. It's always easier to develop a new habit if you attach it to an anchor habit. So, for example, my mindfulness session always follows my morning writing session, always. And so I tacked it on to the end, and that session isn't done. But the thing I want to say is, people forget to do this. But when you make a daily to-do list, and especially in times of crisis when your schedule is all screwed up, you got to make a daily to-do list. It will lower cognitive load, clear goals, drive flow, but put every day. And I've been meditating for more than a quarter century at this point. And I've been working out for more than a quarter century. And every day, right, if you look at my to-do list for today, it says yoga, meditation, gratitude, sauna, like all of the things. It's got all my work stuff too, but it's got my self stuff on it. One that reminds me that my self stuff has the same priority as my work stuff. That's why it's on the same list together. And it's important to remember that, because people prioritize work and deprioritize self. And trust me, if self isn't right, work is going to suffer, right? And so, but you want the thrill of check it off, because you get the benefits of the mindfulness or the new habit. B, you get the dopamine when you check it off, and that helps cement the habit even more. So it's a little tiny thing, but for habit formation, put it on your to-do list.
Yeah, if we don't have that to-do list, it's hard, especially in times like this, to not get fused with our internal experiences and to know where to reorient ourselves.
Totally agree.
Exactly. It builds that structure in our day and in our consciousness. So absolutely.
Brett, we got to, you go. You were going.
I was just going to say, yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, Brent, to wrap, could you give us a 60-second bullet point summary of the action items that we just wrapped with, so everyone's got them and is leaving with them top of mind?
Yeah. So I would say some questions to ask yourself is, are you here now? Can you identify distinction between you and the stuff that you're struggling with, or your internal experiences? Maybe it's not stuff you're struggling with. Are you willing to have whatever stuff that's arising and not try to defend, control, or change them? Are you observing your experience as it is, fully present? And are you aware of what's most important to you and moving towards that direction? Again, we're all in this together, and it's very challenging times. So it's appropriate to experience anxiety in all of life, and especially in a time like now. So be kind to yourself, accept that it's present there, and just as much to a to-do list, whatever it may be, remind yourself and keep moving forward in the direction that's most important to you. And the anxiety can stay there, or whatever is arising, and it will slowly it will pass. Whereas if we continue to control and avoid it, we're going to be stuck with it out even after the pandemic's over. So continue to just be present and move towards what's most important to you all, and practice acceptance. Absolutely.
Awesome. And Rian, if people want to go deeper with the Flow Research Collective, what should they do?
Beat me to it. Yeah, folks, so we will have a button right below this screen. If you want to apply for Zero to Dangerous, you can do that there. It's a great way of learning how to thrive during this period of uncertainty, chaos, overwhelm. And you can book a free call with our team. You'll get on with Troy for 30 minutes to see if it's a good fit. He'll run you through the details of what it actually involves. You may end up working with Brent here if it does turn out to be a good fit. So feel free to go and apply there. We'll chat with you. We'll see if it's a good fit. And yeah, big thanks to you, Brent, for bringing us through all of this as well.
And I would just say that, I'd just say that what we spoke about today is not typically the front, end of what we speak about in our training and our coaching sessions, but given the context that we're in, the time that we're in, sometimes doing the deeper internal work to relate to it most effectively is important.
I love it. I'll say this is the last thing, because and I've said this recently a lot. One of the things about peak performance is you end up working up here, and yet I always feel like if there are holes, in some of the approaches, there's really simple psychological stuff. And because we end up working with top performers, they've usually got that stuff taken care of. But, the truth of the matter is, this is true with anybody, but you don't rise to the occasion. You sink to the level of your training. And we can all see this. It doesn't matter how trained up you are in crisis situations like we're dealing with now. All this really basic, simple psychological stuff. Like if there's a hole in your psychological game, it's now exposed. You've just gotten, over the past couple of weeks, if you've got a hole in your kind of foundational psychological self-emotion game, you're really well aware of it at this, because massive anxiety always brings our weaknesses to the fore. So one, they're a little more visible, which is useful because we can work with them. But I thought this was awesome. Brent, thank you so much. I totally appreciate it.
Respect. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Brent.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah. Take care, guys. All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.